Deena is also a longtime organizer in the trade union movement, community organizer, organizing around questions of immigration and questions of race. Right now she heads up the Workers' Action Center, which is representing workers who don't have unions, generally precarious and low-wage workers. And they've also done some lobbying provincially and have made some significant changes. Small in the overall scheme of things, but very important to the workers affected in legislation.
Hi everyone, how you doing? How you doing? Okay. All right, so I have to warn you, I have a cold, so if I start choking, it's not because of the topic, it's because I have a cold. All right, so I went home. My parents live like a block north of Steeles at Markham. My mum and dad live there. And last fall, after the city elections, I went home for dinner and with my kids and my partner. And we started talking about the elections, right? Ford getting elected, that kind of stuff. And my dad said, you know what? I wish I was living, because he's technically in Markham, right? Because he's like a block north of Steeles. I wish I'd been in Scarborough because I would have wanted to vote for Ford. And I'm, you what? And so I have to tell you, my dad is a working class man. Like, he was an apprentice as a car mechanic in England when he was 17. Had a union, pension. We came here about 23 years ago. And, you know, worked in an auto plant warehouse that was non-unionized, was fired when he had a workplace accident, and then basically had shitty jobs in the last, basically since then, since 94. And, you know, shipper receiver, basically making $10 an hour, right? Until he retired about a year or two ago. So this is someone who I have learned some of my politics from, right? This is someone who I've learned how to fight, and who's, you know, I've seen him take on his union around racism in England. I've seen him, you know, speak up about his employers, who has a really pretty, you know, not bad analysis around corporations, around politics, around what it is to be a working class person, and around racism. And here he is telling me that he wished he lived in bloody Scarborough because he could have voted for Ford. And I'm like, what the hell is going on? And so, and even my 8-year-old, right, my 8-year-old says to me the other week, because obviously she was so appalled by this conversation, and she says, I can't believe Ajababa, which means grandfather in Gujarati, she says, I can't believe Ajababa would have voted for Ford. And I said, I know, but I think that, you know, like in that moment, right, I mean, we all understood that a lot of shit went wrong during that election, right? A lot, on so many levels. But I think that, you know, to me, when I see my dad, right, who I have a lot of issues with, let me tell you, I spend a lot of money on therapy. But anyways, when I see that total disjuncture and that disconnect between a lot of working people who completely bought his message, and where they felt that he really appealed. And my dad said, he was speaking to me. He knows that I'm having a hard time paying the bills. He knows that I don't have money to pay these taxes. He knows what's going on. He speaks for me. And I'm thinking, Rob Ford and my dad? Like, oh my God, you know? So I think that for me, I think we have a lot to learn from that election, and generally from that total disconnection that when we're talking about a left politic, when we're talking about what our vision is, how completely it's missing the boat in terms of a lot of working people out there. And I think that, you know, a lot of the working class that we're talking about are being bombarded with messages and right-wing politics. And, you know, and we don't, obviously we don't own the media, right? We don't own the media and we can't combat that. But I think what we have to do is be looking at how are we organizing? How are we getting our message across? How are we talking about things that resonate with what people are going through? When they're struggling on a daily basis to pay the bills and to try and look after their families, if Rob Ford is the one that's bloody connecting with them, then we have a problem, right? In terms of how we're talking about stuff. And I think, you know, we have a real challenge, I think, fundamentally, about this. When people don't understand issues of taxes, why we're paying for them, corporate taxes, what those taxes are all about, why we need them, what's going to happen if we don't pay them, then we've got a bloody issue here, right? We need to do some fundamental education. And I think one of the things I want to talk about today is that we really do have to deal with this. Who are we talking to out there? How are we connecting with them? How are we building relationships with people? How are we forming our issues? Are they grounded with the people that with the working class that we're going out there talking to? How are we getting people involved in our work and in our campaigns and in the issues we're dealing with? And how is that involvement being sustained? I think that's one of the biggest issues that we have to deal with. And so, you know, with my work at the Workers' Action Centre, you know, we meet a lot of people struggling with unpaid wages, discrimination, human rights, issues of status, not finding work, poverty, isolation. I mean, frankly, a lot of the people that we're working with have absolutely no connection with the trade union movement and with any unions. And if they have had connections with the unions, I mean, as we all know, it's not necessarily been a positive one. And in fact, one of the biggest crisis calls that we get on our phone line, because we have a phone line in 6 languages where workers can phone with workplace issues, one of the biggest, hardest issues that we deal with is when workers phone when they're dealing with disability, discrimination, harassment, racism, sexual harassment, and the union isn't doing anything, and the employer isn't doing anything, and so they feel like they're going to be battling on both sides, and it's really brutal what it does to people. But that's another story. And I think sort of with WAC, people come to us in crisis, right? They've not been paid their wages, they've got discrimination issues, unpaid wages. They're a migrant worker, they've got issues of immigration, EI, they need to access money because they've lost their jobs, right? They can't pay the bills. And so in that moment in our work, people are open to that radicalization. They're open, and we take that moment when people phone and when people connect with us. We take that moment, and what we do is we make the links with what people are dealing with, right? Not paid $6,000 in wages because the employer misclassified you as a self-employed person. So now you've got to get EI, you've got to fight on so many fronts. And we take those moments, have those conversations about that experience and how it relates to the broader issues that people are facing out there, cutbacks, the deterioration in conditions, the fact that we have such crappy employment standards laws that are so bad and there's no enforcement, and that's why people are in that situation. And through that relationship, we build people's connections to our campaigns and to the Workers' Action Centre. They become a member, and we are really focusing on trying to win specific gains, which is how we can take 2 buses out to Scarborough and do temp agency bad bus tours, and how we can do direct actions with employers, where we can go into employer workplaces and take on the bosses there and push against discrimination, and how we're able to take on UPS around their discriminatory treatment against Muslim temp agency workers and the treatment that they fired a whole bunch of women because suddenly they didn't fit the dress code. I mean, but we took UPS on, and we're taking on employers, but a lot of it is through those individual relationships when people become radicalized through their own condition, right? But I think it's really important is through that we start to build that confidence in terms of ability to fight for change, which I think is really important. Now, the challenge for worker centres, and I know the challenge for our organisation, is sustaining this in the long term. You're building this individual by individual. We don't have masses of groups of workers coming in, right? It's not like you have a workplace of 50 or 100 and you get to work with a group of workers. We're doing this one by one by one. This is very labor intensive, as you can imagine, and it takes a lot of resources, and it doesn't happen fast. And another challenge that we have is that, you know, with the kinds of people that we're working with, you don't have the sexy corporate target all the time, and you don't have the big sectoral targets as well. And in fact, when we've tried to look at issues sectorally, we find that there's so many unions, like for instance, in a sector that we'd love to start organizing, you've got 4 or 5 unions organizing in that same sector, which we would have to deal with if we were going to try and take on that sector, which makes it then impossible because you've got that fight happening. And the type of workers we're working with are so marginalized in small workplaces, non-status, migrant, self-employed by misclassification, moving from job to job, working through subcontractors, temporary agencies. And so I think that, you know, it is hard for us to try and find the big target. So then the question is, you know, how is it effective in terms of the work that we're doing? We're also operating across Toronto. We're dealing with many languages, many sectors. The geographic spread is so huge. And I think we're fighting against the larger context of the right-wing media, conservative community agencies and immigrant agencies who are basically, you know, implementing the state's agenda and how they deliver services and stop any type of organizing that's happening. And I think that broader context that's overwhelming with the Ford response, right? The political education that's so needed. And I think it's hard to do consistently what we find at the Workers' Centre, that political education, because you're trying hard on so many levels to try and get people connected to the Workers' Centre, get them involved in campaigns, doing action, but what you're also trying to do is you're trying to do that political education. But I just, in terms of, you know, I've got the challenges. How long do I have, Herman? 2 minutes, shit, all right, okay. That's not long. All right, so,
Just a message.
so I just wanted to say, maybe what I'll do is I'll go to the challenges, and if I have time, I'll talk about our approach at WAC, what we're trying to do. I think some of the challenges. Are we building connections between ourselves as activists or with the broader working class? Do we want to build our numbers? Do we want to kind of expand and make sure that we are reaching out to the masses of the public who are, you know, and involving new workers who are potential organizers, activists that we meet all the time, that we're really trying to encourage them to join the labor movement? Who are our organizers? How are we grounded in our organizations to who we want to reach out to? Are they from the low-income, racialized immigrant communities that should be in our leadership, in our activism, and fight back? I think if WAC had all white organizers, and I'm being very honest, I don't think we would have been able to build the kind of multiracial membership that we have and the multiracial leadership that we have right now. I think that this needs to be fundamentally understood as our base from which we organize from and not an add-on. I'm sick of it being an add-on. And how are we talking about the issues? Are we alienating people, or are we resonating with them? Does it reflect the current context that we're in? For instance, you know, I completely understand the need for free transit, don't get me wrong. But when you've got Ford attacking transit, getting to basically dismantling our TTC system and dismantling any access points of light rail to communities that badly need it, maybe we should be looking at changing our message. Maybe we should be working with a particular community that needed to get that light rail transit, that needs access, basic access to TTC services, so that they don't have to bloody travel 3 hours a day to go to work. And, you know, so they can get back home to their kids. And maybe that's a base in which, where we win a specific transit connection to a community, a poor community that needs it, maybe that's where we can start having those conversations about what it would mean to have a free transit system. And how do we work with that community? What about reaching out to that community and assisting the leadership in that community in that fight back, building relationships, building connections to the working people in that community, instead of us feeling like we have to go in there and do it for them. I think sometimes we think it has to be a quick fix. We always, there's always the emergency. Oh, the provincial elections. Oh, there's this elections. There's this fight back. They're going to dismantle, privatize, contract out. Absolutely, I understand that. I so understand that. But look at how our organizing is able to deal with that. It's always now, 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 but the thing is that now, now, now approach doesn't build it for the long term, and it's actually not working, the now, now, now approach. And that's not a new left kind of theory or anything. I'm just, it's just, and I think, the kinds of attacks that we're facing really needs that fundamental building of a new force of working people out there, and it takes time to build that. It takes time to build those relationships, and it's interesting that Denise was sort of talking about that at the end of what she was saying, because I think that we have to connect with people's concrete issues, and we have to connect with people's lives, and we have to talk about stuff that connects with people's lives. And that's what a lot of at the Workers' Action Centre we spend a lot of time doing, which is trying to find ways to talk about what's happening. This total deterioration of working conditions and wages that are affecting masses of people in our province. How do we talk about that? That builds that connection to get them involved, to inspire people to become involved in the labour movement and see that this is their struggle. And that's what we're all about. And I'll talk about that later if I have time, but I think that's about it right now. Okay, thank you.